Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, a father and son's near-death experience, devastating weather, and the question is, are we in or entering into World War III? Powerful, cheap new drug on the market, and more conflicts warring amongst the nations. These are just a brief review of our report for you today. But first, we're going to start off with a father's love and determination to save the life of his son, not from criminals, but from doctors.
From doctors?
Doctors of all people. Texas dad George Pickering II couldn't bear the thought that his son was brain dead after a massive stroke left him on life support. George Pickering III's mother, that was the son, and brother has signed him up for organ donation, but his father wasn't having that.
Pickering II went to the hospital with a gun and barricaded himself in the ward where his son was staying, refusing to leave his side, reportedly threatening staff as well. Now, after a 3-hour standoff with police, he surrendered, knowing that his son had squeezed his hand. The SWAT team brought their own team of doctors who confirmed that the patient was indeed not brain dead as the doctors had suggested.
Interesting. Well, Pickering II was making eye contact as well as following their commands, and they were completely amazed at his response. So obviously he was not that brain dead as the doctors had suggested, and the father also has been released from jail as well.
Well, after a 40-year-old ban on crude oil exports by the U.S., that ban has finally been lifted. The measure was part of a budget plan for 2016 approved by both parties in Congress, which Democrats agreed to in exchange for tax breaks for their renewable industries. Now, many Republicans claim this will boost the American economy and the job market.
You know, Democrats disagree, saying it will cause a loss in jobs and a drop in the economy because those refinery jobs will be shipped overseas. Well, Democrat Raul Grijalva of Arizona said this still gives oil drillers an enormous policy win that does our economy no good and threatens the climate progress made in Paris.
Well, environmentalists, on the other hand, worry that fracking, a method used to extract natural gas and oil from underground shale, will further damage the environment. This reversal on the export ban also plans to drop oil prices even more, even after hitting its lowest on the market right now in recent years. So it's already low, and they're saying it's going to go even lower.
I know that they say that's not great for the industry, but the consumers are definitely benefiting from it. Well, staying on the topic of oil, a small town in Oklahoma has the title of the U.S.'s largest crude oil storage center, Cushing, Oklahoma. Don't know if you've heard of it, but because of that, the Department of Homeland Security has its eye on the small northwest Oklahoma town. Back in 2012, President Obama even flew there to push for the now stalled Keystone pipeline, saying that Cushing will be the starting point of that southern end of that project. Of course, that pipeline kind of got stalled in Congress and Senate.
Well, Cushing is home to an estimated 54 million barrels of oil, and the Department of Homeland Security is worried about its vulnerability, but not to terrorists, but rather earthquakes. Now, earthquakes caused by the over 4,500 fracking disposal wells that dot the entire state. But the storage tanks were not designed to withstand earthquakes. Now, oddly enough, for nearly a century, Oklahoma never used to have earthquakes until 2008. So earthquake free, so to speak. Right. But now with all the fracking, especially since the time 2008 and more recent. Now you're seeing these earthquakes.
Well, so there's definitely a correlation that's undeniable there. That's when the state reached its drilling boom. 7 years later, of course, 2015, over 5,000 earthquakes have struck Oklahoma, and 700 plus have been a magnitude of 3.0 or greater. Now, this has got the state officials concerned because if a large enough earthquake were to strike Cushing, it could disrupt the U.S. energy market and become a national security threat.
Mike Mulder, the senior director for Mid-Continent Asset Unbridled Energy, says that so far the increase in tremors hasn't affected the company's operations as of yet. Now, the storage tanks, which hold anywhere from 350,000 to 575,000 gallons of crude oil, are not built to withstand serious earthquakes. Those facilities were built in a time when earthquakes in Oklahoma, as we mentioned, were very rare.
That's right. According to EcoWatch, before 2009, there were only about 2 earthquakes a year in Oklahoma, but now there are more than 2 per day. Oklahoma has more earthquakes than any other place in the entire world, according to a spokesperson from the Oklahoma Corporate Commission.
All because of the fracking.
That's right.
As most of the world now celebrated Christmas, many families in the southern states were picking up the pieces as the storms ripped through their neighborhoods, destroying both property and lives.
At least 11 people were killed and many others hurt as tornadoes touched down across 5 states. Northern Mississippi was the worst hit, where more than a dozen twisters struck the southern state and spurred a state of emergency. Across 7 counties from bordering states from Arkansas in the west, Tennessee in the north, and Alabama in the east.
Mississippi's governor visited the region and expressed his condolences for the lives lost in the aftermath of these storms.
Well, the weather might be overwhelmingly wet in some places, but in California, they're still experiencing severe drought, and lakes and rivers are drying up left and right. In Folsom, California, an old mining town was lost after a reservoir was built and subsequently submerged the old mining town underwater.
Now residents are able to search the remains of the old town because 85% of the water has vanished. Mark Mellinger, a local, said he has been around that area forever and has never seen it that low. Now, experts say what we're seeing in California could be a glimpse into the future for many cities as we experience the effects of the warming planet.
And they've had record drought over the last 4 years in California as well, and meteorologists don't really see it getting any better anytime soon. Well, Shane Blunt with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation said, "We've heard people talk about this," speaking of the droughts and the shrinking lake and river levels, as being a new, he said, a new normal.
New norm. And even when they do get the rain, it's just too little, too late. Several inches still don't amount to the millions of gallons that they've lost.
Right. In fact, they would take 10 years to get them to the point where they need to be.
Well, some recently unveiled military plans of the 1950s by the U.S. has some countries furious. Now, the plan showed that the U.S.'s intentions to attack Eastern Europe with an atomic bomb in a preemptive strike against the Soviet bloc. Now, those on the U.S.'s atomic hit list included East Germany and Berlin. Now, this news has left some to question the sincerity of late American President John F. Kennedy.
Well, Kennedy said in an address in 1963 that the U.S.'s commitment to defend Western Europe and West Berlin stands undiminished because of the identity of our vital interests. Although there were hundreds of military and industrial sites on the list, populated areas were also on the list to be targeted as well.
Daniel Patrick Welch, a writer and political analyst, said that things are still the same in how the U.S. views Russia, nuclear weapons, and their use of them against others. This is evident of the fact that they are still upgrading older nuclear weapons.
Well, continuing with the war amongst the nations as well as the war on drugs, Larry McGee has our report on how the nations are responding to the ongoing war epidemic, so to speak, as well as a new drug that is on the streets and how it's affecting the users and the officials, the rescue people and the doctors who have to deal with it. Larry, what do you have for us?
The prospect of nuclear confrontation is increasingly on the minds of world leaders. Recently, J. Robert Oppenheimer was cited, who after the first atomic nuclear test at Los Alamos was quoted as saying, "Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds." Social commentators regard the day of the test as the day we finally looked into the abyss and realized just how easily we hold the fate of our species in our hands. At present, 9 nations possess over 15,000 nuclear warheads, just a small fraction of which, once detonated, would disrupt global climate and wipe out the ozone layer for at least a decade. The prospect of nuclear war, however, is only acknowledged by many to be feasible within the context of another world war. On that subject, former Pennsylvania Senator and Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum had this to say.
Thank you, Wolf. It's great to be here in Las Vegas, and I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. This is an important time in our country's history. We have entered World War III. We have entered World War III. We have entered World War III.
Of course, the idea of employing nuclear weapons which could kill billions of the planet's inhabitants and destroy the Earth is insane. But as an indication of the world's current state of sanity, this week, more than 30 injured and 1 dead after a driver deliberately jumped the curve and mowed down pedestrians like something out of a video game. The incident took place on Nevada's famed Las Vegas Strip, where 24-year-old Lakeisha Holloway is reported to have snapped and begun running down citizens with their 3-year-old daughter present in the back seat while eyewitnesses begged for her to stop. Holloway is said to have jumped the curve not once but twice, and after being apprehended, she is now being held under 24-hour watch. Big on the watch list of Florida authorities is a new drug epidemic which some officials are comparing to the rise of crack cocaine. The new substance is being called Flakka and is ravaging the sunny city of Fort Lauderdale, sending as many as 20 people to the emergency room per day. Dr. Nabil El-Sanadi of Brown Health Medical Center, and speaking on the drug and its effects, says it produces superhuman strength accompanied by psychosis and belligerence, requiring many people to restrain and hold down the users. The medical professional says all of the drugs he's seen, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines, and oxytocin, Flakka, he says, is the absolute worst. With users also reporting extreme paranoia, it might be difficult for some to understand what its draw might be. An answer which police officials believe is found in its price, just $5 for the average bag. As ISIS insurgents continue to creep ever so close to the Iraqi capital of Baghdad, there is debate brewing in London over whether or not to extend bombing campaigns against the mercenaries into Syria. Thousands gathered outside of London's parliament to make their views felt as the British lawmakers were set to vote this week. Some members of parliament are proposing that the move would reduce the probability of terrorist attacks in the UK, but protesters aren't convinced, holding that the West doesn't see Syria as people. We see them as a country that is umbrellaed under the name of ISIS, protesters say. But they're not. They're innocent men, women, and children who are being killed. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan, Jeff, back to you.
Well, Katan, Larry had quite a few stories for us, but going back to the Rick Santorum, interesting comments saying that we are in World War III.
Yes, that's very powerful words right there.
Well, continuing in the news, U.S. and NATO have certified a new military site in southern Romania. With goals to be operational by the end of 2016, this anti-missile site will include a powerful radar, as well as missile interceptors and powerful communications equipment, which they say will be used to prevent potential threats from outside Europe.
Moscow has objected to the development, but the U.S. and NATO have said that the new site will not have the capacity to threaten Russia.
Well, the long military history between India and Russia just got a bit longer as these two countries just signed a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, on a 2-day visit to Moscow, met with President Putin and presented Vladimir Putin with 2 special gifts. One, an 18th century sword, and the other, a page from the handwritten diary of Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, I noticed he, oddly enough, actually was a pusher for peace and nonviolence. So,
great point.
Yeah, we'll see how that works out. India plans to purchase an estimated $7 billion worth of submarines, frigates, and S-400 air defense system, despite countries like the U.S. also trying to get a foot into India's weapons market. Russia remains at the forefront of negotiations.
Well, Italy is demanding a discussion on the extension of economic sanctions against Russia. Now, some reports describe the development as surprising. There have been clues coming from Rome, and interesting, they say the clues have been coming out of Rome for quite some time. Paolo Gentiloni, Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, said, "We must underline that there is not a difference between Italy and our European allies over sanctions."
He continues, "It's more a difference of Italian necessity to consider future relations with Russia. We need to reconstruct the relationship with Russia, which is of absolute importance for European strategy." Matteo Renzi, the Italian Prime Minister, followed that same line by saying, "It's clear the sanctions damage everyone, but we have common values with the European Union and we hold them in high regards. We want to respect them."
Italy, not wanting to show disunity with the EU, said it does not object to the sanctions, even though some have warned that the harm caused by the sanctions, the pressure from Washington, is simply too strong. So, Catan, they're kind of in a rock and a hard place there. They're suffering from the sanctions, but yet they don't want to be in disagreement with the rest of the EU party there. So they're kind of saying, "Hey, look, we need to discuss these things and see if we need to have them in place."
Right.
So talking about that pressure, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden said it is true that they did not want to do that. But again, it was America's leadership and the President of the United States insisting, oftentimes almost having to embarrass Europe to stand up and take economic hits to impose cost.
So is it, it's almost like, is it really more influence, a very strong influence more than just leadership to, push the other nations to get on board with these sanctions against Russia?
Absolutely, because he was saying here, you're going to have to take one for the team. We know it's going to hurt your country, but we need to impose these sanctions against Russia.
So it's not always a win-win for all parties involved.
Absolutely.
And that's something that Putin was saying we need to agree on so that everybody can benefit. One German official commented, "We can't forget that Russia must be treated decently. We can't let our leadership with Russia be dictated by Washington. We need to make an effort for a better relationship with Russia."
Many in Europe don't want to see sanctions extended. Russia's own sanctions on EU imports of food have already been hurting countries like Poland, Italy, Spain, and particularly Greece. Now, the EU leaders will meet in Brussels next week to discuss these sanctions.
Well, tensions continue to increase between the U.S. and Russia. Since Moscow began its military campaign against the terrorist groups in Syria in late September, they have been providing information on ISIL to the U.S. Well, the U.S. Defense Department, however, says it will not share intelligence on Daesh terrorists with Moscow unless it changes its stance on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Well, the comment was made by Pentagon spokeswoman Michelle Baldanza during an interview with Russia media.
And as we have reported in the past, the U.S. and Russia have opposite views concerning the fate of President Bashar al-Assad. Washington insists that Assad does not have a role in Syria's future, but the Kremlin believes only the Syrian people should decide the future of their own country. Now, this disagreement continues to cause a lack of cooperation between the two countries' military operations as the conflict goes on in Syria.
And if I believe that's correct, that was also a part of their resolution with Syria that the United Nations Security Council met, that the Syrian people are to decide what takes place in their country. We'll see how far they allow that to actually play out. Well, Turkey's tensions with Moscow are boiling over into Iran. Iran is now arguing that Ankara was wrong for downing the Russian warplane last month. Turkey says it's offended by the accusations.
Iranian officials have also backed Russia's recent accusations concerning Turkey's involvement in the illegal buying and help in exporting oil from ISIL-controlled territories. Now, this caused a stern warning from the Turkish Prime Minister to Tehran against making such insults and attacks. Tehran, like Moscow, also supports the Bashar al-Assad government in Syria.
Turkey is a country that once had no problems with its neighbors, but now it seems to have nothing but problems with them. Ankara is currently dealing with foreign policy blunders with Russia and Iraq, and now it appears Iran could be the next relationship jeopardized.
Well, 2015 is wrapping up, and while most of Europe celebrates the holiday season, thousands of refugees wait miserably in the French town of Calais for their chance to enter the UK. Now, refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya endure the freezing weather and pouring rain with hopes of getting to Britain for a better life.
That's right. Many of the Calais refugees have been waiting for months with no success. It's not that we don't want to help them, one Calais resident said. We just don't have the capacity to handle them all. Another man, in the Christmas spirit, I suppose, said, "Christmas goes on and it's our holiday, and it's not a problem of mine. I love Christmas." Yeah.
Well, will Christianity disappear from Iraq and Syria in the near future? In an RT Crosstalk interview, the topic of the Christian faith being endangered was discussed. Now, while the West is forcing Middle East regimes to topple, Christians are, for the most part, forgotten.
Journalist Iban Thorholm said a spiritual perspective of what is going on in the Middle East is needed to gain a clear picture. While the West is focused on bringing liberal democracy to nations in the region, their opponent, ISIL, is focused on the exact opposite, bringing forth an Islamic State.
As the conflict ensues, entire ancient communities are being destroyed. Now, this is unprecedented. The reality is so serious, some experts believe that within 2 generations, Christianity could be completely gone from the Middle East. Reverend Nadim Nassour from the Awareness Foundation agreed, saying, "I think, yes, we are on the way to vanish from the Middle East."
Interesting. Well, Ms. Thronholm agreed with the Reverend, pointing out, with the state Europe is in now, growing weaker and weaker, it will not be able to win the fight over Islam. But the most hair-raising statement she made followed, saying, quote, "The goal of the Islamic State is actually to conquer Rome, because they want to go to Rome and they want to govern in the place which is the capital of Christianity."
And interestingly, Katan, that's not the first time we've heard that comment. We've heard it several times now. So you can see they're serious. They want to get to Rome.
Yes, and I know that one of the leaders in a statement, a publicized statement for Islamic State, said that their next objective is to conquer Rome. So these are just confirming more of those statements and their ultimate goal to get to that place and take over.
The prophecies for our time period are coming to pass just as the Holy Scriptures show. Well, believe it or not, you are living in Bible times. Yisrael Hawkins explains these prophecies in his weekly sermons and press releases, monthly newsletters, and prophetic word magazines, including the catalog books of Yisrael Hawkins. Now, the information is endless and the knowledge is priceless, even though it's absolutely free. As Yahweh's representative, Yisrael Hawkins is offering you a truly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to leave the evil-like-the-gods way of this world and be trained as a teacher of peace that will help restore the morality that mankind has pushed aside thousands of years ago. Don't miss out. Contact the House of Yahweh today and begin your training for a position that will last forever.
When you contact the House of Yahweh, don't forget to request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can also call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also check out our new website at www.ypnnews.com. And to email the House of Yahweh, send your emails to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And don't forget www.yisraelsays.com for the latest and best reference material for the Holy Scriptures on the market today.
From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.